Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the deeply entrenched conflict system that's currently devastating Sudan. We're looking at a situation today that has moved far, far beyond a simple battlefield clash. It's really morphed into a complex structural crisis that is fundamentally reshaping the entire nation. To grasp the sheer scale of what we're talking about, we have to start with an absolutely staggering number. 33.7 million Sudanese people are currently in need of assistance. When we talk about the mechanics of war, it's so easy to lose sight of the actual people living through it. But this number right here, it represents the massive, widespread collapse of basic human security, food access, and infrastructure across the whole country. Amy Pope, the Director General of the IOM, really hits the nail on the head regarding the human stakes right now. She points out that across Sudan and the broader region, families are facing impossible choices: either remain displaced without basic services or return to communities that have been completely shattered by conflict. With over 12 million people displaced by the violence, there are simply no good options. People are fleeing to neighboring countries like Chad and South Sudan, or they're moving internally to areas that are just entirely unequipped to support them. So, here's how we're going to break down this crisis today. 1. The 2026 humanitarian crisis. 2. Decades of civil war. 3. Tactics of territorial control. 4. The fragmented war economy. And 5. The cycle of impunity. Section 1. The 2026 humanitarian crisis. Looking at the reality on the ground in early 2026, it's clear the conflict has moved way beyond fluid battles. It's become a consolidated architecture of military coercion. What that basically means is that control, not resolution, is the main operating logic here. The warring parties are structurally excluding civilian actors from any decision-making on ceasefires or governance, while the civilians themselves are the ones absorbing the totally devastating impact of this prolonged stalemate. Section 2. Decades of civil war. Now, to truly understand why this is happening today, we have to look back at Sudan's recurring pattern of conflict. There is a very clear historical cycle. We had the 1955 and 1983 civil wars, which were deeply rooted in ethnic, cultural, and political divisions. Then we saw the 2005 Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which ultimately led to the independence of South Sudan in 2011. But despite those massive historical shifts, the underlying issues, things like power, resource distribution, and centralized control, were never fully resolved. And that unfinished business led right up to the current crisis exploding between military factions today. Section 3. Tactics of territorial control. Let's examine exactly how the two main factions are fighting this war on the ground, because they have completely different playbooks. The Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, rely heavily on air operations. They aim to project state authority, often operating out of Port Sudan to signal sovereign legitimacy. On the flip side, the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, focus on ground-level sieges. They use coercive population control, restricting civilian movement to lock down massive territories like Darfur and parts of Kordofan. They're basically using fear and access restrictions as a weapon. And you know what's truly alarming right now? Drone warfare has become completely normalized by both sides. This isn't just some episodic escalation anymore. Aerial strikes are deeply embedded into routine operations, often fueled by external supply chains. We're seeing loitering munitions, sometimes called suicide drones, being used heavily, with wide reports of international actors facilitating these advanced weapons networks for both factions. All of these military tactics lead to absolutely devastating civilian harm. Just look at the prolonged siege of Dillon, or the tragic strikes on the Ed Dayan Teaching Hospital in East Darfur, where researchers documented repeated munitions impacts resulting in dozens of deaths. We're also seeing the targeted destruction of farming communities, which is pushing displacement camps in Darfur into outright starvation conditions. Violence against civilians isn't just a byproduct here. It's practically absorbed into the way the conflict is practiced. Section 4. The fragmented war economy. So how is this all being funded? Well, Sudan's collapse has created a highly fragmented war economy, and both sides have to extract revenue to keep the fight going. In SAF-held areas, shrinking state revenues are compensated by decentralized, petty extraction through state and security institutions. Meanwhile, in RSF territories, because they lack formal fiscal authority, they use toll-based systems. They extract money by controlling movement, trade, and even humanitarian access. It's a setup that creates massive financial incentives for both sides to simply keep the conflict going indefinitely. For regular people, the fallout is literally total economic devastation. Vital agricultural markets like gum arabic and El are paralyzed. Over in the critical al-Burhan agricultural scheme, wheat cultivation has essentially been cut in half. With agricultural production costs surging by 80%, the entire financial ecosystem is collapsing. Economists are noting that this is rapidly and perhaps permanently eroding the Sudanese middle class.
Section 5. The cycle of impunity.
This brings us to the international response, and a really massive question. When horrific atrocities, from extrajudicial killings to widespread sexual violence, are committed by these armed actors, what actual consequences do they face? Well, the crucial and frankly shocking point is that accountability is incredibly rare. We're actually seeing key commanders from the RSF, leaders who oversaw widespread abuses in places like El Fasher and Jizr State, defecting to the South. And instead of being prosecuted for the atrocities committed under their command, they're welcomed in. They get new uniforms and full amnesty. It's a system that actively rewards defection over justice. Mohammed Osman over at Human Rights Watch puts it perfectly. He says, those responsible for serious international crimes and human rights violations do not get a free pass if they switch sides. Utilizing amnesty to deny accountability for war crimes just guarantees that these vicious cycles of impunity will continue. I mean, if military leaders know they can simply switch teams to erase their human rights records, there is absolutely zero deterrent against committing those crimes in the first place. Even international justice mechanisms are, frankly, severely constrained. The International Criminal Court has been investigating crimes in Darfur, sure, but their mandate is strictly limited to that specific region based on an old UN Security Council referral. That means horrific abuses happening right now in Kordofan, Gezira, or the capital city of Khartoum. They fall into a massive geographical blind spot for international justice. So I want to leave you with this critical question to think about. Until the international community enforces real, sweeping accountability across all of Sudan, how can this entrenched cycle of conflict ever truly end? If the architects of this war face no consequences, the structural crises we've explored today won't just persist. It's going to become the permanent reality for over 33 million people. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.